Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Colin Marazzi. I'm a policy strategist with the ACLU of Ohio, and this is the latest installment of our 2021 webinar series entitled Everything You Need to Know About Redistricting. And that is exactly what we're going to get into tonight. We are going to cover everything from the process to what's new to what we can expect the advocates to be participating in during this process. So I really would like to welcome you to this critically important webinar talking about one of the biggest issues coming up in the state of Ohio in 2021. I would like to first mention that we do have closed captioning services available. If you would like, they are down at the bottom of the Zoom screen, so please hover your mouse icon over there and you will see the CC icon for your use. Before we begin, I wanted to introduce our panelists. We have a star-studded cast here of public policy experts, and I could not be more thankful for them lending their time to us. To start, I will begin with Brandy Slaughter, who serves as the Public Policy Associate for the Ohio Council of Churches. She's also an adjunct professor at John Carroll University, where she teaches a graduate course in nonprofit advocacy. She's an ordained member of the clergy of the Church of God in Christ. And she's also very active in other civic organizations, such as the National Council of Negro Women, and she's the Political Action Committee chair of the Columbus chapter of the NAACP. She received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Morgan State University, and she got her JD from Capital University, primarily focused on child and family law. Welcome, Brandy. I'm so happy for you to be here. Next, we have Heather Taylor Measle, who is the Executive Director of the Ohio Environmental Council. Heather has over 20 years experience working at all levels of government for environmental and public health policy initiatives. As I said, currently serving as the Executive Director of the Ohio Environmental Council, where she has really expanded and grown both the staff and the operations of the OEC to a very impressive track record of accomplishing goals on a short timeline. Heather was a very special guest here tonight because she was a chief negotiator in the constitutional amendment negotiations that were going on in 2018, which then went on to the May 2018 ballot and has led to where we are today with our new redistricting process. Prior to joining the Ohio Environmental Council, Heather worked as the Deputy Legislative Director for the Natural Resources Defense Council Action Fund, where she worked with Fortune 500 companies and federally elected leaders to develop environmentally conscious policies and to increase corporate sustainability practices. Welcome, Heather. Again, we couldn't be more thankful for you joining us tonight. And then we also have Jen Miller, who is the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Ohio. She certainly has a track record of success in this state as well. Prior to working with the League, she was with the Sierra Club in a number of different roles. Most recently in 2008, she served as their Executive Director. Over the course of her career, she has worked in the civic engagement space for a number of different organizations, including the King Arts Complex, Columbus Rec and Parks, Global Gallery, and the Ohio State University. Jen earned her master's in arts policy, education, and administration from the John Glenn School of Public Affairs at Ohio State. And she also holds a bachelor's degree in vocal music and history and ethnic studies from Capital University. Also, she was a graduate of the U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory Leadership Academy. Quite a mouthful. Thank you, Jen, so much for offering your time to be here. Really can't wait to dive into it. But before we do, I want to welcome all of you, all of our viewers here on Zoom, as well as Facebook Live. We are incredibly grateful for you offering your time to spend with us this evening, partly because if you weren't here, we would just be four people talking in a room to our computers. But on a more serious note, because it shows the urgency of this moment and how we need to prepare ourselves for a very consequential process that's going to play out here in 2021. So, as I said, we are very welcoming and excited for you to be here, but we want to get to know who you are as well. So please, while you are listening to this first segment, I encourage you to please put your name and where you're from in the chat box. And then also we're going to play a little redistricting trivia here. We have two questions that I would like for us all to participate with. The first trivia question is, what was the name of the room that our current congressional district maps were made? And the second question is, what was the name of the 3rd district given during the last redistricting process? That's Joyce Beatty's district, for those that may not know. So please answer your questions in the chat. We will make sure to get back and highlight the correct answers and some of the best of the rest that we think are worth sharing. So, so that's all from me. I want to just go ahead and jump right into it. And I'm going to start with you, Jen. So we've all known, like, this momentum, this conversation about redistricting has really been a long time coming. We first heard about the issues with our current congressional maps and state legislative maps all the way back in 2011 when they were first adopted. But there really has been a lot of public momentum building towards having a new and better process. So I'm wondering if you could just share with us kind of like how we got here. You know, what were the problems we saw and what was the goal to fixing those?
Great. And I just want to thank you, Colin. I love working with you and ACLU, and I love seeing all the folks in the chat here. And you're right, we have a great panel. So I'm just going to jump right in. The first thing I just want to remind all of us is this concept of partisan gerrymandering. It's really human instinct to use your power to cement in power for the future for your team, right? And so this idea that when one party has control and they might use that control to build a map that secures even more partisan advantage, that's really something that we have seen throughout our history here in Ohio. And quite frankly, partisan gerrymandering is as old as the Republic itself. Unfortunately, Ohio has some of the worst gerrymandering in the country. And so what is it and why is it bad? Again, it's manipulating those maps so that there's a guaranteed outcome. The map makers, I won't say where they were, but when they were making the congressional map in 2011, they decided they were going to make it a 12-4 map, 12 Republicans, 4 Democrats, no matter what. They did that by really diluting the power of minority votes. So those voting for the Democratic Party, which is the minority party, by either splitting them up, diluting them, cracking them into some districts, or packing them so that maybe a district really only needs 50% plus 1 vote to win, but really it's going by like 75% of the vote. So 25% of those votes could have gone to another place and potentially made another district competitive. What we know to be true, both at the State House and at the congressional level, is that our legislative maps stay the same, even though we had, in this last decade, even though we had banner years for both Democrat and Republican candidates. So if you think of the Obama years, we still had a 12-4 map. If you think about the Trump years, we still had a 12-4 map. The same is true for the Ohio General Assembly. Why that matters to League and has mattered to League for more than half a century is because when politicians get to pick the voters, when politicians rig the map and then know that their majorities are secure and their seats are secure, they don't have to listen to the public. Grassroots voices, voters' voices are not as heard in that process. We also know that if someone's going to, we know which party is going to win the election, the real election happens during the primary and therefore feeds more extremes. And those extremes, we've seen them over time. And I think we can look at it no further than last year when there were discussions about calling racism a public health threat. And it was decided in the General Assembly that there wasn't enough time to discuss something so lofty, but then they rushed through a stand your ground law, something that even many Republicans do not agree on. And so democracy doesn't work when representation is so skewed because of unfair maps. So just real quickly, we started working on this actually back in the 60s and 70s. The first time we tried to bring a ballot initiative to the people was 1981. We then tried again in 1999. In 2005, we tried again. In 2009 and 2010, we had legislation that we thought would pass, but didn't. And then, in 2012, we tried and we failed. Finally, in 2015, after we members got out our clipboards and we were all over the state collecting those signatures, did the General Assembly decide to sit down and compromise with us. We realized that we kept failing at the ballot box because we didn't have both parties supporting it. And without having both parties support it, we didn't think we would ever win. And so 2015 is a really grand work of compromise for reforming how the Ohio General Assembly maps were done. After we got done with that, we got our clipboards out again. And these are our volunteers. And by February of 2018, the League and Common Cause and NAACP and all of our friends had over 200,000 valid signatures that were collected by volunteers. And that's what created the space for the negotiating team to sit down with the General Assembly. So, and I know Heather will talk about that, and she should, because she spent a lot of time on that. But what I'm trying to share with you is this is over a half a century of work where the people had to continue to demand fair maps. And now it is time to demand that the letter and spirit of these reforms are upheld. And so in 2015, the reforms passed by almost 72% of the vote in all 88 counties. In 2018, the reform package passed by almost 75% of the vote in all 88 counties. Ohioans, regardless as to where they live or how they vote, how they want fairness and they want a democracy that functions. And I'm excited about programs like this where we can help demystify that process so the public can participate. One other thing I wanted to just quickly mention is that it also has a backstop. So we are going to do everything we can to put pressure. We are already putting pressure. We started calling lawmakers in 2019, asking for them to uphold the spirit of these laws. We did it last year. We are putting pressure here. You're going to hear from all of us in the ways we're doing that. Because we think that public outcry is really important for trying to get fair maps. But the other thing that this does is, because the Ohio Supreme Court is now the jurisdiction, it's the judicial body that would hear partisan gerrymandering cases, we also have an opportunity to do this in the court. I'm sure some of you remember in 2018 that we actually challenged the constitutionality of the existing congressional maps. And that was an incredible legal team by ACLU National and ACLU Ohio. It was with our dear friends at A. Philip Randolph, and it included many individual plaintiffs as well as the league and other organizational plaintiffs. And we made the case that these maps were really unfair. And we thought we were going to bring fair maps to the people before we even got to this new census. Unfortunately, that appeal would have gone to the US Supreme Court, and the US Supreme Court decided that such cases were not justiciable, meaning it's really not their space to decide. And so unfortunately, that's been closed to us. But another really positive about these bills is it determines that the authority on these cases is the Ohio Supreme Court. So I think I'm going to stop there, except I wanted to give a couple examples of ways that our unfair maps are harming representation. One of those is that right now, because of how unusual our districts are drawn, there are 3.5 million people who live closer to a congressional district office that's not held by their Congress member. So I, for example, drive by, if I were to drive to meet with my congressperson, I would actually pass a different congressional office first. That's not mine. It becomes really hard for people to be pushing government when they're not even sure who their lawmaker is. And actually, both the Hamilton County and Franklin County boards of elections accidentally put some voters in the wrong districts simply because the lines were too complicated. I also just wanted to throw out there this concept of representational fairness that I think we all know that Ohio leans a little bit red, maybe somewhere in the 50 to 55% Republican on a lot of statewide races. But in both the Ohio General Assembly and in our Ohio congressional delegation, about 75% of those seats, so super majorities, go to Republicans. That's a concept of representational fairness, where what we're going to see, those outcomes, the kinds of legislation that gets supported, the kinds of things that move through are really going to be out of step with the general public because we have such an extreme power imbalance that's very different than the way the electorate votes or believes. So I think those are a few things. I want to say this: everyone can play a role, and everyone should play a role in this work. And that's what I'm particularly excited about. And these other two speakers are incredible. So I will be quiet now and turn it back to you, Mr. Collin.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. And that is just a staggering statistic that you mentioned about how over 3 million Ohioans don't, like, the closest congressional office to where they live is a congressional office for not their representative. I think that speaks volumes to the problem that gerrymandering presents to having responsive representation in government. And I know from my neck of the woods up in Akron, I know for a fact that there are folks that have the same county council member that don't share the same congressperson. So it's really a very troublesome fact that this confusion exists because these lines are manipulated. Now, I wanted to get back to some of the questions, to some of the responses to our trivia questions. But before I do, I wanted to say, I apologize, I should have mentioned this at the outset, but we are operating the Q&A function. So if you have questions that you would like the panelists to answer, I ask you to just throw those in the Q&A and we will make sure to respond to those. And also, I wanted to touch on just, the reasons that so many people are getting fired up about this. And Heather, I'm going to bring this over to you, is because there was so much effort put in to securing these new rules and securing an improvement to the process that we saw play out in 2010. And as somebody who was in the room, who was having these conversations with legislators and stakeholders, I'm hoping you can kind of pull the curtain back on why you fought so hard for the things that you did, and what those improvements will bring to this process.
Thank you, Colin, and thanks for having me. This is just it's almost like a family reunion seeing the chat box names. I think I've visited with about half of the people in your living rooms during 2017 and 2018, talking about what was going to be important to us, learning the history of so many of you who have worked on this for decades, and really trying to build a coalition that could demonstrate that the public was not just wanting legislators to act, but demanding. For me, why I do this actually starts with where I was born. I was born in a company town in Ashland, Kentucky, and everyone worked at Ashland Oil. My elementary school was eye level with the smokestacks of the company, and kids started getting sick. Teachers would carry whistles during recess, but they would also carry asthma inhalers. And pretty soon the school shut down. And our community, though, my little poor neighborhood, we were still right there. We were still right there. We were playing still where the smokestacks the wind would blow right into our yards, and no one seemed to care. And so it really became, and I'm sorry about this, I'm having some work done in my house, so I'm sorry about the noise here, but it really became about power, right? So power to not demand better. Power, we didn't have the power to demand that our community was taken care of. We didn't have the power to ask the company to change its behavior. We didn't have the power to wonder why we weren't given neighborhood schools, and why that was not something that was important, and why we had to be bused so far. It was the epitome of not having power. And so many communities, not just where I grew up in Appalachia, had that exact same experience, but so many communities right now are having that exact experience. And one of the roots of that is gerrymandering. This idea that politicians get to pick their voters instead of voters getting to pick their politicians is one that really, really drives me, and I would say also drives the OEC to not just prioritize energy, water, and land, but also democracy. Because we believe if your politician has to actually, if your representative has to actually listen to their voters, then they will also care about the fact that the water coming out of the faucet for a mom's sippy cup is clean and affordable, that they will care about the air basin, and that they will care that you have beautiful places to walk and to breathe. And so that's why OEC is incredibly dedicated to this, to make sure that we're right-sizing the power here so that the people have a voice. And that's really, those are the conversations that we got into with many of the league members and other members of the coalition coming out of Common Cause and other amazing organizations. We wanted to make sure that communities were kept together, that public participation flourished, that there was accountability throughout the entire system. And that there had to be a sense of representation that was proportional to the people of Ohio. And so those were kind of the goals that we went into in the redistricting process in 2018. And tried our best to negotiate. You win some, you lose some. Of course, there are things in here that every one of the negotiators would change. But we had done our best to be able to improve this system, and the system really is improved in quite a few ways. But it really, I just want to make sure that everybody understands. But it's really going to depend on one main thing, and that's all of you, right? Jen, one of the things she said was that that the people power was what gave us the ability to demand to be in the room and then to demand reforms. And that was really true. I was literally able to take pictures of League of Women Voters members who were at concerts, like mosh pits, with their little redistricting shirts on, collecting signatures. And that spoke volumes, because they knew that the people who were sitting at the table representing the public had an incredible force behind them. And that's what we must demonstrate again. So let's talk about the actual reforms that we were able to get. And I'll cover both the 2015 effort and the 2016 effort. You'll remember the 2015 effort was all about the state legislative races, and the 2018 effort focused on Congress. And they're similar, but definitely not the same. So for instance, and let me just say, there's kind of three different areas that we got here, right? So we have a better process with articulated requirements. The second is that we have options for public accountability and making it easy for the public to participate. And then the last thing is options for accountability, whether that be in the courts or with citizen activity, to be able to ask them to redraw the maps. For the state legislative process in 2015, essentially it starts with a 7-person commission. The members of the commission are the governor, the auditor, the secretary of state, and 2 members from both the House and the Senate, one of which in each of those bodies must be from the minority party. So in this case, the Democrats. And they're supposed to get a map. That's supposed to happen by September 1st, the first vote. So not really in the too distant future. We're going to talk a little bit about that date a little bit later when we talk about some census delays, but in the Constitution, it is September 1st. And the way that vote is supposed to go down, if you want a 10-year map, you're supposed to have 4 of the 7 members, and 2 people from the minority party voting for it. If you can't get the minority party voting for it, then you basically get a 4-year map. And then if in that case, it kind of increases what can basically invalidate the map. And the court can invalidate the map if House seats have 6 splits, or if Senate seats have 2 splits when it comes to county, municipalities, and townships. The other way that the court could invalidate the map is due to partisanship or some kind of a political preference that can be demonstrated. So that's how the Senate or the state house maps are drawn. Just very, and I'm telling you, like, very top line. There's a whole bunch of like little details that we can definitely go into for you wonks, but that's kind of the top line summary. On the congressional side, it's a 4-part process, right? So it starts with the congressional map starts with the state legislature. And to get a 10-year map, you're supposed to have 60% of the chamber and 50% of the minority party. That first vote is supposed to be taken by September 30th. If that's unable to happen, then you jump back to the commission. Now this is the same commission that could be that would be used on the state legislative side. And with that one, you have to get a majority of the commission, including 2 votes of the minority party. That vote is supposed to happen by October 31st. And that's also how you could get a 10-year map. If that doesn't work, it goes back to the legislature, and its 10-year map is with 60% and 30% of the minority. And then finally, there's a 4-year map option, which is just a simple majority, but it does increase kind of the considerations. And so that's when we have things like partisanship pop in, no consideration, no special consideration for incumbents, lines in keeping communities together, that kind of thing. So if partisanship goes completely out of the window, then it does increase, as far as what the considerations are for how those maps are drawn. So that's kind of the overall of what we got, minimizing those splits, keeping those communities together, trying to get partisanship under control, ensuring the public participates, and then ensuring we have accountability at the end.
Well, thank you, Heather. That was, a great little peek behind the curtain there. Very valuable insight. But I wanted to bring up a question that was just posed. And I think this kind of gets to the heart of why, this is going to take such a team effort to make this process come to fruition for a fair map. And that is, we have a viewer who was very active in this process back in the 70s when Democrats controlled the House. There wasn't much appetite then for Democrat or for, reform. And now we kind of have the flip side where we have still one party control, but it's the other party. So what gives you faith and what gives you that extra pep in your step to make sure that we do get this done?
Well, for me, so many of you all have heard about HB 6, right? And I think this is a great question, by the way. I just want to remind people that bill was never going to pass until some of the Democrats decided to vote for it too. And so for us, when it comes to the environment, we have bipartisan supporters of the environment, and we have bipartisan opponents when it comes to the environment. Here's what I can tell you. Extremism, I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, extremism is a recipe for dysfunctional government. And a government that can't talk to each other, a government that actually can't govern. And we've seen that whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in education, even recently over public health orders whenever it comes to COVID. But in the energy world, I mean, even right now, there are 2 bills in the House. One bill that basically says if you are natural gas, then the locals shouldn't have any control. But if you're solar and wind, then that kind of development would be subject to referendum, which basically it means that there's nobody who would develop in the state of Ohio when it comes to solar and wind. But we're going to treat both of those things differently. obviously hypocritical, right? Obviously like picking winners and losers, anti-market, all that kind of stuff. These kind of ideas come up, especially whenever they're so obviously hypocritical. They come up whenever we're talking about extremists. The big ideas become, the big absurd ideas, let me say, become possible whenever people don't actually have to listen to their voters. In fact, a lot of times and what we saw in HB6 is they were only listening to their donors. And so what we have to do to be able to have a healthy democracy, I don't care what letter is beside your name, we need you to put your people first. And I think that that's what these reforms at least set us up to do, as long as people show up in that process, and as long as we continue to work the process. Let me just say, Colin, there's 4 ways to win under this scenario, right? So we have the State House is a way to win, the commission is a way to win, the courts are a way to win, and then we could do another referendum either on the map or a standalone ballot initiative. So there are 4 ways that we can advance this. Every one of those ways is going to demand your participation, and really making sure that they understand that they need to listen to you, not the extremists in their party.
Well, thank you, Heather. I mean, I can't say it better myself, really. That was just another key reminder of how much we are going to have to be a part of this. We, as in Ohioans together, that is how we are going to affect this change. So thank you very much for your comments, and you will be back shortly. Before I go to our next panelist, I wanted to kind of give a shout out to some of the folks that are here right now. We have a lot of dispersed people from across the state. We love to see it. We've got people obviously from the 3 Cs, but I'm seeing folks from Warren County, Akron, Kent, Worcester. I'm even seeing Bluffton in here. So all over the state of Ohio, we see that folks are energized and ready to go for this new redistricting push. And this kind of leads directly into our next guest topic, which is Brandy Slaughter. I'd like to bring you in, and I want to ask you, as somebody who represents a faith advocacy group, somebody who isn't at the top of anybody's mind when they're thinking, democracy process work, but you're still here and you are demonstrating how important this is. Just kind of walk us through why it's so important to you, the people you serve, your colleagues, in a non-traditional voting government advocacy organization.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Colin, for inviting me to be here to share a little bit. The answer to your question really calls for a bit of reflection. And I just want everyone just for a moment to think about an America that would exist if the church hadn't interceded and been a part of the abolition of slavery, or a church who didn't become involved with the women's suffrage movement, or a church that didn't participate in the civil rights movement. I mean, if you think about how the church has been active over the years in moving things forward. I mean, think about if a Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King sat at home and said, hey, I'm just going to preach from the pulpit. I'm not going to organize anybody. I'm just going to, and me and my 4 and no more, that's what I'm going to focus on. God is going to be pleased with that. Think about what would be the result of that. We wouldn't have movement today for Black lives. We wouldn't have a place where we have elected representatives that look like me, that are considerably different, and that have moved and advanced over the years. And so for me, the value of the church being involved in movements like this, oftentimes folks think, oh, well, this is political. This isn't political. This is about equipping our folks on the ground in the communities that we live in our congregations, to have a voice in the political process, to have a say in who represents them, and to elect representatives that live alongside them, their neighbors, that can witness the issues, that can witness the challenge, and then have a vested interest in solving things for folks in our community. The church is very simply supposed to be a moral authority. We're supposed to lend voice. We're supposed to lend resources, organization, all of that to resist evil. And I do view gerrymandering as evil. There's no way around that. We have to be those that are charged with justice and fairness. Let me also, in addition to being concerned about fairness, we are also a church, a body, faith believers that believe in the intrinsic worth of all life. And if you believe that everyone has value, you have to believe in the dignity of the human personified. And part of making sure that we as people can participate in our political process, can make sure that we can hold elected officials accountable is key to that. I think, gosh, there's so much I can say. I want to go back a little bit. It's so funny how much you learn about folks when you're on these panels. Heather, I'm from Appalachia too, Logan, West Virginia, but ours was coal, not oil. And so I came up in a time where even in my community, people would pay folks for votes and give people rides, to make sure that coal stayed in place. So there's all types of these strategies to dilute power of communities. But for me, lobbying or advocating in the General Assembly, and I've been there for about a decade doing this type of work, is becoming increasingly more difficult, particularly if you do not agree with the dominant controlling party. And so if I believe that every human has value and every human has a responsibility, a duty to participate in democracy, then this really limits our ability to get out concepts that help us charge our own way with our community and how we want to work in our neighbors. I think I don't want to go on too long because I am a preacher, and preachers can close 3 times and before they're actually finally finished. I don't want to take too much time, but there is a scripture for those that are of the Christian faith perspective. There's a scripture in Romans. It's Romans, the 13th chapter. And oftentimes people lift up this scripture to encourage people to be more of a passive acceptance of, the political powers. But in actuality, if you really look at that text and you apply it to the American context, the fact that we have a democracy, frankly, something like a gerrymandering, it's almost sinful because it places people in a position where they can't shape their own dignity. They can't participate in making decisions about their communities and about their life. Yes, I see some of the comments. It is absolutely an equity issue. It's absolutely sinful. I will call that. Frankly, when you think about the partisanship and you think about this is about control, this is about manipulating policies, it's almost akin to witchcraft. And you can talk to me later about that scripture. We can have a whole deep conversation about it. But the reality is the church, we shouldn't be anywhere else but right here in this moment, talking about how to ensure our folks live in communities, have representation that looks like them and reflects their values. I live in Columbus. I live in the King Lincoln district. And in King Lincoln, some years ago, the highway came through. Before it was King Lincoln, it was Bronzeville. And it was a thriving community for African Americans. And when the highway came through, that diminished the community. And so this whole conversation about drawing maps that are inclusive of the people who live in communities, that can map out the assets of their communities, is so important. And without it, you have more of the same. You have a political party robbing people of their power. And as people of faith, we just simply can't stand by and allow that to happen. So thanks for the time to just share a little bit and the partnership, Colin. This is so important. And so if there are folks out there, you know, I hear this all the time with churches, and we serve about 17 different denominations across our state, 4,000 congregations, 2 million people strong. There are lots of folks that just don't think the church has a role. They're too scared to touch it. Oh, it's dirty, it's politics. You got to roll up your sleeve. I'm sure people thought that Dr. King should have stayed out and set to the side, and folks wouldn't have had their power. We wouldn't have had be where we are today. So thanks, Colin, for a few moments.
Oh, well, Brandy, you are absolutely welcome. And, you know, you make a great point. I can't imagine what the civil rights movement in this country would look like without the church. It was not only a pillar, but an instigator of that movement. So I think to carry on in that legacy and making sure that equal representation is happening all over the United States is actually right on brand for the church. So thank you for addressing that. So before we move on to the next panelist, I wanted to hit the response to our trivia questions from the beginning of the program. If you weren't here, the questions were: one, what was the name of the room that our current congressional map was made? And the second question was, what was the nickname given to the 3rd congressional district during that map making process? We do have some correct answers, so congratulations to those who responded correctly. That was the Bunker was the name of the room that these maps were created, and it was actually a room in the DoubleTree in downtown Columbus that was fitted out with computers, and there was nothing but maps being drawn in a very secretive and very dishonest way, if we're going to be blunt. But that was the first answer. And the second answer was the Franklin County Sinkhole. And that was a description of the 3rd district because that was how much they packed as many Democratic voters into a single district. It was like throwing votes down a sinkhole, never to be seen again. So like I said, there were a couple correct answers. So congrats to everybody. I also saw one that was a highlight of the best of the rest. It was called the Blob, which is what somebody said the name of the 3rd district was. Very, very appropriate, I feel, and very on brand again. But those kind of the vernacular used there and the tactics that were used in this past redistricting cycle in 2010, that really goes to show of what we're up against right now, is that was how they chose to operate then. And we need to do everything in our power to make sure that cannot happen this time around. So again, congratulations to those who were correct. And now I want to bring back Heather real quick. And I know that there are questions in the chat as well as the Q&A, and I promise we are saving time at the end to get to all of those. So keep putting your questions in there. We're flagging them and we will make sure to get to them. But I wanted to turn now to Heather again about this hiccup we have in the road now. You know, I swear 2021 is nothing but 2020 part 2 in terms of what can go wrong now. And that, of course, is the census delay that was created or was a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we need to just kind of clear up, what does this mean for the process? If this data is going to be delayed, you know, what's kind of ripple effects can we expect to happen down the line? So please.
You know, I negotiated on benches. I negotiated in an alcove of a women's bathroom. We talked during the Super Bowl. Like, it was the crazy places that we spoke, and never once could we have even anticipated in any other way or in any way a pandemic, right? So the census did not go off the way that any of us were hoping, right? You know, people were kind of locked in their houses. They weren't in locations which were centrally located in a way that you could collect data. Everything was slowed down, and you know, funding was cut. We had problems with the post office. Like, there's just anything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. As a result, we heard from the Biden administration a while back in COVID times. I never know if it was yesterday or 2 months ago, but but we heard that they believe that they're not going to get us the data. It'll be about a 4-month delay, so probably September. We're not really sure exactly when that exact date would be. Typically right now, we would be getting started, we'd be doing a lot of work. We could, by the way, already be doing that, but regardless, we just don't have a lot of the data that we need. So as a result, we've got a lot of things that are hanging over us a little bit in trying to understand what to do in light of the delays associated. Like, obviously they're not going to be ready for their first vote by September 1st. We may not even have the data by then to be able to do that first vote. And we don't believe that they'll be ready for September 30th. And they especially won't be ready when it comes to following the rules of public participation and all of those other items that are going to be so important to all of this. So the other thing that we're keeping an eye on right now is this Plan B situation that's in the Constitution. In the Constitution, it basically says that the legislature can use another basis for determining how to draw maps if something unforeseen happens. And so we, whatever that other basis is, we want to make sure that it keeps the spirit of what we originally negotiated. We want those communities to be together. We want to avoid partisanship. We want your voice in this process. We want to make sure that there's accountability. And we want to make sure that we have recourse if bad behavior happens, because goodness knows we're seeing bad behavior go on every day. So that's what we're working on. We're in active conversations. Jen, I think you and I have been on 4 or 5 hours of conversations at least about this, even together in the last 2 days. And I know that those conversations will be continuing going forward. Jen, did you want to add anything on that? Because I do know you have a lot of data on that too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say this, anything in elections is kind of like criminal code for those lawyers out there, where you pluck one thing and 6 other things get impacted. And so right now, unfortunately, we're trying to take a 4-month period and really scrunch that down. And how do you do that really still defends the interests of the public? And it's interesting because part of that could be keeping time to litigate if we don't get it. But of course, we want the public in there for public hearings and all that transparency. And so what I say, one of the things we need to do now is we need to continue our advocacy and action and planning, which we have all done. And we are absolutely going to have to continue to work on this. One thing we're afraid of is that this case, so the Secretary of State has sued the Census Bureau. So the state of Ohio has sued the Census Bureau for faster data. Of course we want faster data, but bad data makes bad maps. Part of the reason why the case has been slowed down is because actually civil rights groups and the League and the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights and others actually sued in California, saying that we had undercounts, like Heather just said, and especially of communities of color. And so we don't want to rush this data simply to rush the data. Let's keep in mind that it also is used not just for redistricting, for low-income school lunches and transit planning and emergency response planning and so many things for a decade. And so we're going to have to continue to work together. And I have had a couple questions that I just think kind of fit in a little bit, which is this idea of how do we trust the General Assembly? How do we try to do that? And it's interesting because I was just on a panel with the Kentucky League of Women Voters of Ohio, who have nothing. So Heather and I and Brandy and Colin and I, we can all agree that what we have is not perfect. We can all agree that we wish we had more time and more resources and lots of things, an independent redistricting commission, but at least we have some power in this process that, as Heather said, let's maximize this opportunity at the State House and at the commission. We have the courts if we need them, and potentially can go there again. And again, that goes to the Ohio Supreme Court. Instead, there was a question about how the courts are playing a role. Yes, the US Supreme Court has basically said, hands off, that's problematic, but this goes to the Ohio Supreme Court, and we have referendums. So I think I just want to go back to One last kind of thought, which is this idea of failing forward. You know, the first time we tried to get reform, we didn't even get out of committee, right? The first time we tried to collect signatures, we didn't even get on the ballot. First time we got on the ballot, we didn't even get 40% of the vote, right? And so we are failing forward, and we will, under all circumstances, maximize every opportunity we can to bring fair maps to the people.
I think that goes to something that we could be talking about like right now. So like right now they could be doing things, right? So we have the census that is delayed. Yes, that's fine. Like life happens. I've been sitting in this room for 300 and, almost 400 days. And I did not think that would happen this time. Well, I guess then maybe this time last year, but certainly not this time 2 years ago. And so life happens. But there are really important things that could happen. Right now, we have the Ohio Legislative Task Force on Redistricting, Reapportionment, and Demographic Research. There was a question in there about using other data. The answer is they could use other data. We need them to use the census data. We think that's the best data to be using. We don't like the other data. But why aren't they having hearings to even understand what's going on? Why aren't they exploring what the options are? Why aren't they releasing money so that when we do get our data, we can hit the ground running? Those are the types of things that we need to be talking about. They haven't even had the first meeting about the census with this task force. So here we've known for how long that the census was going to be delayed, and they aren't even meeting to talk about like what that means. The level of irresponsibility that's going on is overwhelming. And one of the things that we should be doing right now, today, is demanding that they get to work, because there is plenty to be done while we wait for the stuff on the census to be sorted out.
Well, that actually is a great segue into this next part, which is there's all these things that can be done, but are not being done. So what can we do about it? How are there ways that folks on this call, their friends, their neighbors, their colleagues, how can they get involved right now? So I'm going to just open that up for everybody. Jen, I'll let you go first, but I want to hear both from Brandy and Heather, what opportunities are out there for folks?
Yes, this is great. We need you in all kinds of ways. And what's great about the campaigns we have going is that there is really room for lots of different things. So I'm excited that Brandy will talk about engaging faith communities, for example. We have a legal committee, for example, for those lawyers that want to help us think through some of these sticky issues. We have a speakers bureau. So if you want to have organization, learn more about redistricting, we have a speakers bureau of volunteers. And you should know that when we lost at the ballot in 2012, we realized that the people of Ohio did not understand gerrymandering or map making. And so we equipped a whole bunch of volunteers with PowerPoint, and they went all over the state. And we think that was foundational for winning in 2015. So something like requesting a speaker or becoming part of the Speakers Bureau is really helpful. We're doing community mapping now, where we have folks who are trained in that map process, and they'll listen to you in your church or your Girl Scout troop or your school. They'll listen to you, and they'll have up on the screen that map and highlight it and talk about what that means, so that when we go into hearings, we can say, you know what, we did 50 maps with communities, and never was Toledo connected with Cleveland, right? Those kinds of things can really help us. We have a curriculum that we're getting completed in schools. And Brandy is also part of Fair Districts, as is Colin. So Brandy, I would love to toss it to you to talk about the engagement in faith communities that we're up to.
So Jen, everything you said, we echo, and everything that you've mentioned, the Speakers Bureau, the community mapping, we want to do that with faith communities. We want to do that at churches. Call us, email us. We are here and happy to do it. We even want to go as far as maybe you want to do it in your church and your leadership is saying, this is too political. This is going to get us in trouble with the IRS. We'll even train you about that. Reach out to us so that you can know what the rules are, what the rules aren't, so that you are in compliance. Beyond those things, we're hopeful to develop some toolkits for your pastor, whatever they want to put in the bulletin when we come back together and we have at formal worship, in your bulletin, there can be information there about redistricting, and giving folks the information that they need to participate is so important. So Jen, we are all on board with what the coalition is doing, but we are focusing on all faith communities, not just Christian. I represent a Christian organization, but any people of faith, even people of no faith, call us and we will make sure that we get someone out to help you educate the people that are in your purview.
Got to be on mute. Got to happen one time, you know. Well, thank you for those opportunities and putting that information out there. Folks, please pay attention to the chat. I'm sure there'll be some links and everything put in there where you can follow up on if you're interested in getting involved in any of those opportunities. But now I want to switch gears and I want to just open this up for Q&A as we've been collecting these questions throughout the course of the evening. I have one that I think is a really fascinating question. And I'm gonna pose it just to the group, but it is, in the 21st century, why don't we leave this up to an algorithm? Why don't we leave this up to a computer program?
Yeah.
You know, it seems like that the technology's there. Why don't we use it? So I'd love to hear your all's takes. Jen, I see you nodding, so why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Get this question all the time. So here's the thing, even in an algorithm, we can bake in bias. And so there's no perfect solution for making a map. There's no perfect tool to make that map. So an algorithm also might not know those kinds of things about, they might think, for example, that a community stops at a highway, like Brandy suggested, when actually it doesn't, you know? And so we really do need that people input. One thing that I'm really excited about that I just wanted to share is that for the last year, the League and Common Cause have been working with researchers at Ohio State as well as students at Ohio State, not to build an algorithm to make maps, but actually to create rapid response ability to read maps. And so I just had a meeting with the students today. We have probably about 50 students who have worked on this, as well as some incredible experts. And so when maps start coming our way, we're at least going to be able to know things like how partisan biased they are, how, you know, what communities have been split, what jurisdictions have been split, racial and income, those kinds of things we are going to be able to analyze that in real time, which is not exactly what you're saying, but it is trying to use big data for the power of the people, so that as these maps are flying at us, we can actually analyze them, help you understand them so that you can advocate.
Yeah, and I just jump in. For me, it is people in communities know what their communities are. People in their own community know what the assets are, know what are those kind of artificial boundaries, if you will. They're not necessarily streets or something that a computer, you know, you have to allow people to share what the assets are, share what their community looks like, share and otherwise, you know, folks are not given the ability to shape the maps. I'm sorry, I'm kind of lost my words, but I'm so passionate about it that, you know, you can't draw maps that are fair without talking to the people. That's the bottom line. You get more of the same if you do a computer, if you do the legislature alone. We have to let people weigh in what's important to them and how they want to be represented.
That's where accountability really comes in too. And that's where public participation, right? Like, you know, to Brandy's point, to Jen's point, you know your community, and the process that we have here allows for that participation to be out there. There's going to be some opportunities for public commissions where the People's Commission, where you can go and you can join with others to really be drawing maps, to be encouraging kind of the definition of community. There's just all of these amazing opportunities here, especially in the next 6 months to get active, and that is going to be vital. Like what will create fair maps to me is not taking judgment out using an AI, you know, although I agree with Jen that they would all definitely have bias. What to me creates fair maps is accountability and the people showing up and demanding their folks do the right thing.
You know, Colin, we've had some really great stories in the chat. And I just want to say this. One of the ways you make a difference is by just telling your own story of how gerrymandering is working for you. And so I've seen multiple of these. We have Linda Ford, who is saying, I live in North Downtown Cincinnati and I am paired with Warren. And you know what? You can tell the story about how that makes absolutely no sense. And you could just write a letter to the editor about how that makes absolutely no sense. And they took the most progressive part of Cincinnati and put it with the least progressive county to guarantee that Republican outcome. That was on purpose, right? And so we should be telling that story. I think similarly, there was the story about 12, right? That goes from North Campus, which I used to live on, and is an entirely different economically and socially than Mansfield, than Cambridge. And so these are the stories to tell about how this doesn't mean community, and this doesn't mean fairness, and telling those stories and helping demystify what's going on to your neighbors, it really does bring more people along into the process.
I also think you could make this stuff fun, right? Like, I don't know about you all, but like, I just got my first shot. So everybody's like, I'll see you in May. And like, how can we use like even this period of time for re-entry as an opportunity to gather and to tell our stories, but also like, what does it look like to have, I know that I love a good scrapbooking party, right? Wine and scrapbooking. What does it look like to have wine and draw on some maps? Like, let's get our thinking caps on, and you hosting, you are the most powerful person in your social circle, right? You may not get to get your current member of Congress to listen because they are in gerrymandered districts, but you can get your best friend to listen. You can get your aunt to listen. I can even, find a crazy relative or two to get to listen. And so how do we do that? Do that on Facebook, do that on letters to the editor, do that by inviting them to have wine and have a conversation and play with the computer so you can map out your community. That is going to be powerful.
Well, thank you, Heather. And
I know we're
I'm sorry, Brandy, we're bumping up really close against to time. So, and I want to get to this one last question that I think is a doozy and kind of a stumper. But I would like your quick reaction to this, and then we'll close. But I've seen this question, and it's a great question. What does a fair map look like?
Ha.
So Heather, why don't you kick us off? Again, try to be brief because we're pushing up against it, and then we'll go Jen, then Brandy.
For me, a fair map is one that represents the people, right? That keeps communities together, that doesn't game the system for partisanship purposes, or any other purposes, that equalizes the power between political donations and the voter. And so that's the summary for me. I could go on for an hour on the actual, extended definition, but if you keep communities together and you keep partisanship out of it, I'm going to be a happy girl, even if that means that we don't win every single time.
I think those are great. So let's talk about what a fair process is. A fair process means that we're actually just trying to make a map for the sake of representing Ohio, and not with this goal of cementing in partisan outcomes for a decade. So I want to mention that, but I think fair maps mean all those things, that we aren't just willy-nilly splitting communities where we literally right now have a house that is surrounded on 3 sides by another district. We are not having these ridiculous lines. We're not having districts like Snake on the Lake where you literally have to travel through the water to get from one side to the other. That's not fair. And that's part of what I think as we try to get to fair, we have to explain how it's not fair today. But I'd also like to just skip to one more thing. You also know how we get to fair maps? Because all of a sudden, legislation that seems like common sense to all of us starts to move, right? That all of a sudden, whether it's something like gun safety, where large portions of the population, including my gun owning family, agree with those who never want a gun at all, right? And there is legislation there that could pass that doesn't. Why? Because again, it goes back to Heather's point of accountability. Part of what Fair Maps looks like is something that we don't even see until the policies start to change to truly meet the needs of the people of Ohio. And with that, I love to end with my dear friend Brandy. So I give it to you.
Yeah, I think of Fair Maps results in more voter turnout. It results in less disenfranchisement. It results in reversing this trend of apathy that we see. And we know that policy is better when the more of us participate and the more of us make our points known and prevalent. And so for me, that's what a fair map looks like. It's the result of a fair map is everything that Heather said, everything that Jen said, but then it results in greater participation. And that's what we all should be seeking for.
Hey, Colin, there is an interesting question about opening up to other suggestions. And I just did want to say we are working on our map contest again. When the whole idea there, in addition to saying what your community is, this is what the King Lincoln, formerly Bronzeville, looks like, which is smaller than a district. We are hoping that everyday Ohioans will submit maps to the General Assembly and to the Commission, because you know what the message is? It's actually a lot easier to make a map that's representative than it is to gerrymander. And that's a point we can make over and over again, and the media will cover it, and it gives us standing if we have to go to court, not that I want to. So those are the kinds of things, there will be lots of ways to participate.
Well, I think the one common thread that was there in all three of your statements as to what a fair map is a value statement. A fair map is a value statement of who we are as Ohioans and as Americans, of equal representation, one person, one vote, and fairness. And I think that we can all come together and make that values statement a reality. And I think I speak for all the panelists here that we are ready to go, and we are ready to do this with you also. Now, we are coming up. It is 10 after 6, so thank you for those that stayed with us. We have now entered the shameless plug portion of tonight's program, so I would like to open it up. Brandy, I'll start with you. Tell us something that the Ohio Council of Churches is putting on soon.
Shameless plug, two things. We just had our advocacy day, so we our biggest thing has passed us, but we have quarterly webinars, and our next one is in April on minority health. So go to our webpage, look at the events. Please join us to hear more about the topic. Beyond that, aside from the budget, redistricting, our third huge policy place is ending the state and the federal death penalty. So please join with us. There's been bills introduced. There'll be more about that. The ACLU is a partner, the league is a partner. Let's do what we need to do to get that piece of legislation across the finish line.
Jen.
So on the 30th, we actually have an event that looks at gerrymandering and women's issues and something called gendermandering, which is that we get fewer women in office with the more partisan gerrymandered a map is. So that's on March 30th. You can contact us to get that information. On April 21st, we're actually working on looking at race and representation. So how the Voting Rights Act should be applied and how we consider the rights of communities of color. And we will have a couple of the nation's leading civil rights lawyers join that, as well as one of the nation's experts on the Voting Rights Act. So those are a few, but if you go to fairdistrictsohio.org, you'll find out about a whole bunch of other things we're up to, like building relationships with boards of elections for voters' rights, many other things.
And Heather.
So we actually just did our big redistricting briefing a couple of weeks ago with our membership, but we do have a couple of other really cool things coming up. On March 30th, our young professionals group known as Emerging Leaders here in Columbus, 31st is going to be talking to Alexis Nicole Nelson, who's also known as the Black Forager, and Lucy Biggers from Now This News, to talk about how young people are organizing online, especially around climate change. The other thing that I think is really cool that's going to be coming up in Cleveland. So that's in Columbus, although in this this world, who cares, I guess. But up in Cleveland, we are also proud that we are going to be serving as a community partner with the Cleveland International Film Festival. That's April 7th through 20th. And the movie we're going to be sponsoring there with some others is The End of the Line, The Women of Standing Rock. So type in Ohio Environmental Council, you can get a little discount on that. But it's a really great opportunity to see an amazing story of activism and really standing up against power in order to make sure that your community is protected.
Wow, that's a pretty cool event. I'm not gonna lie.
Watch our Facebook page and Twitter. You can get a whole bunch more information. I'm sure that the others as well. We have it all up there.
And then finally, for the ACLU, we have our next installment of our webinar series coming to you on April 8th. It is repealing the death penalty once and for all. Very exciting topic, a lot of movement in that space right now in Ohio. So we are going to lay out all the facts and all the reasons why it's time for Ohio to put that practice behind us. I cannot thank our guests enough for lending their time tonight. And I cannot thank the viewers enough for lending their time tonight. You know, I work on this for a living and I feel like I learned a lot tonight. So I'm just saying, you know, I'm very proud to be colleagues with these folks, and I'm very proud to be in this battle with you all as well. And don't forget, you're never more than one Google search away from getting involved. So do it to it. And thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your night.